Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Belmont Stakes Talking Horses. Sarah Albadwi and Andy Serling getting ready for a great card on an absolutely spectacular day, and we don't have to rush quite as much as yesterday. But then again, if we just sit around and gab, then we'll run out of time again.
Which we could very easily do. I could fall into
I know I can
conversation
do
about
it.
plenty of stories for quite some time. But great to be here, amazing weather, and just excited for an incredible day of racing ahead.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a great day, and anybody can see it's absolutely fabulous out. And we hope you're joining us here, but if not, we hope you're enjoying the races from home, and we'll get right to work, and we'll head over to Naira Bets. Head over to NairaBets.com. If you're not a member, use the promo code Belmont25 and we'll match the $200 of your initial deposit, as well as giving you a free $25 bet for the Belmont Stakes. We have a $31,000 hit and split series, the Belmont Stakes. I love that. $31,000. It would only be better if it was like $31,487 or something, you know? So you got to go over to NairaBets.com for information on that, but those are always fun. Opt in as well for those bets. You don't want to miss out on the opportunity to get some extra free cash through Naira Bets. We also have a Belmont Stakes money back guarantee. Bet $10 to win, bet back. So if you bet $10 on a horse in the Belmont and run second or third, you get your money back. What else do we have? There's not a lot of slates today. We got the Showdown, the free online contest. Head on over to Naira.com/showdown for more information. I imagine a lot of you have already played the Showdown. And I believe, last but not least, we are on all day. We're on FS1 from 11 to 3 p.m. We are on Big Fox from 3 to 7:30. We'll continue, though, the simulcast on FS1, I believe, throughout that. And then FS2 from 7:30 to 8 to wrap things up. Tons of action, tons to talk about, as I'm already losing my voice, Sarah. Race number one. I think race number one is a good place to start with a discussion of the turf courses. I don't think there's any argument that Love to Shop is not the horse to beat in here. I thought, and we'll take a look at the race, that she ran very well last time. Reflexivity was on top, very slow pace. She was a second-time starter for Chad Brown and Klarovich. And Love to Shop made a big extended run. I actually think less distance is better for her because she kind of didn't finish it up at 7. But yesterday with the rails at 0 on both courses, for the first time on either course this meet, there was a big advantage to saving ground, and outside movers really did not finish off races. And I'd worry a little bit that this horse is not going to spend a lot of time inside.
Exactly, and she doesn't really have that early speed to get her into that position right next to the rail either, at least not from what we saw in her last start. Though, of course, if she runs a buyer like she did in her last race, she's a contender, and she's one that you have to at least look at when going through this race, and really improved on that surface switch off the layoff. But you bring up a great point that she is likely not going to get a beneficial trip.
My first great point of the day? Really? Wow, this is really early.
I know,
for
it's
me.
like breakfast time, and you already had a great point.
Haven't had a great point, 9:30 in the morning. She was very good. That was a fast race. It's faster than these horses have run. So I'm just assuming that you're a gigantic Dr. Seuss fan, and you figured you'd start the day with Cindy Lou Who.
Yeah, that's me. You pegged me.
Okay,
for,
that was the only reason I could come up with, so I'm dying to know.
She exits a race at Gulfstream Park where it was a 5-furlong sprint, and she didn't get out of the gate all that quickly. She was pretty far back in that race early on, and that's not the kind of position that you want to be in those sharp turf sprints down there, especially behind a runaway 3 to 5 favorite. I like that she was able to make up some ground late, and while she's had a few chances, only 4 of those 7 starts have been on turf. She's hit the board in all 3 turf sprint opportunities as well. And I think that this distance and the kind of trip she had last time, getting a little bit more ground to work with here will do her some favors, although the post draw certainly did not.
Did not. She did run well at Kentucky Downs last year. We'll see. She will be a big price. I felt like there were 2 horses that were potential alternatives to Love to Shop. One of them was the 3 Roman Goddess, who did have a bit of a trip last time, bobbled to start, dropped back a couple of lengths, and gets a significant rider upgrade to Flavian Pratt. And I think that she is dangerous. I'm not in love, though, with the race she comes out of. It's the one that Accept the Outcome comes out of, as well as Quiescent. And I just wonder if that was kind of a bit of a stinker of a race. But the horse I like is Get Respect. And it's not, to me, this is not a turn back in the sense of I don't like turnbacks in the turf. I think Barclay Tagg's finally running this filly in the race she should have been in from day one. If you look up her pedigree, the dam was a sprinter, the second dam was a sprinter, and she's a horse that just probably wasn't suited to the longer races. I know that she doesn't have the speed sprinting necessarily, but Dylan's been more aggressive. She draws inside, and I think Get Respect is a horse to reckon with getting into a sprint for the first time.
And you wonder, too, if those blinkers on, she might show a little bit more speed than she has in the past. Her buyers are second best to the favorite, so she's a logical alternative. I put her a little bit further down, but she makes a lot of sense.
We'll see what happens, but the horse to beat in here is the favorite, Love to Shop. Can she work out the right trip? Of course, she's a Violence, and as is Forte for the same connections much later in the day. Much later in the day. About, in fact, 9.5 hours from now.
It'll feel like tomorrow.
You have to enjoy these days. So they managed to scratch your selection in race number 2, Sikkim. So as we go to race number 2, where did you go? You should be dancing.
I ended up taking a horse coming out of the same race as her that also had a little bit of trouble in that start, though I felt as though the more significant trouble was more towards the outside in that race. But You Should Be Dancing stumbled a little bit coming out of the gate and getting back to the 7 furlong distance, which she is 2 for 2 at. I think that she really appreciates this distance as she now has had a couple of races to get into fitness, and I do feel as though she was able to overcome that stumbling start last time out, make up some ground towards the outside, and I just felt like those two had rougher trips than the one I'm having a moment who does come out of the same race and finished ahead of them.
Yeah, I didn't think the stumble affected her negatively at all. She kind of stumbled forward, and to me it didn't really affect her, and she's a horse that comes from behind as well. It was a race where the speed held together fairly well, especially considering how fast the pace was. I've never been her biggest fan. I think this was an interesting race. I think Solib is going to take a lot of money based on the big fig last time, and obviously we disagree about her. But my feeling was you missed the opportunity last time at a big price. I don't love the field that she beat. I just thought this was a tougher race.
Yeah, it was. I mean, she improved joining the Mike Maker barn, as many horses often do, so riding that train forwards a little bit. I think that you have to take her last race as a sign that perhaps she'll continue to move forwards, but I do agree that those were weaker foes that
I also
she was facing
just
last time.
don't know where the heck the race came from, because
That's a
it's
fair
completely dichotomous to any race that she's ever run, and I always worry about taking those horses back. I was sort of flipping a coin between the 7 Royal Dancer and the 8 Silver Skillet. I end up with Silver Skillet on top, and I think both of these horses can be forward, but it's really important for these riders to try to find a way to save some ground at some point, and whether or not that can happen remains to be seen. And also, to be fair, Weekend Rags, who I have 4th and you have 3rd, because it's Irad Ortiz, and as David Aragona, the morning line maker, said to me yesterday, when they were so embarrassingly overbetting that Irad horse, was it first time on the turf or something yesterday? And he said, I made the horse 5-1 because Irad was riding it. I guess I can't make these horses low enough.
Be the boss?
And yeah, be the boss. I mean, I don't know who thought that horse was a good bet at 7-2. I mean, if you want to bet at 8-1, that's fine, but in Weekend Rags, but she could be the controlling speed in this race, and I think given the circumstances, it's going to make her a lot more difficult than maybe us picking her, 3rd and 4th in here. But as far as Silver Skillet, the knock is, despite her pedigree, which very much leans to turf, and Liam's Map's been an effective turf sire in sprints, Christophe never even looked to run her on the turf. Maybe he felt she had dirt ability that sort of never showed up, but she has a pedigree that says she can handle the turf. And I thought Royal Dancer was a horse that was very wide last time, that has run well enough in past races that maybe second off a layoff she would run better. So they're the two I wanted to focus on, but I'm worried a little about the racetrack.
Yeah, I am too. I think you have to really pay attention to those horses that are going to get that good early position with the way things have been playing so far.
And this weekend will be the only times they're down, I guess, until the last weekend probably, because we're back to 9 feet on both courses starting on Thursday. You probably haven't finished the Thursday card like I have.
Not quite. I have taken a short look at it.
The issues that I have in finishing them. Race number 3, as we get into the stakes action of the card with the True North, has a significant favorite. It's probably going to be hard to beat in Elite Power. I'll let you talk about him.
I I mean, this is a horse that was able to upset Jackie's Warrior. If you go back to last year in that Breeders' Cup Sprint race, his second start of the year, now coming in here, and he ran incredibly well over in Saudi Arabia, and he's had enough time off since then that I don't think you have to worry about the travel as much as if he was coming back on shorter rest to do so. The problem with him is that he doesn't have any early speed, but he's been able to overcome paces that were at least moderate in the past, so he's one that's just really improved lately since breaking his maiden after a couple of tries, and he's the horse to beat, of course, and I didn't really see anybody that I wanted to take a huge shot against him with, though the speed is a factor in here.
Yeah, we'll get to today's flavor in a minute. As far as elite power, I'm not way against him, Sarah, but let me ask you a question. Okay, he beat good horses last time. There's no question about it. He also got an incredibly contested pace, and Gunite probably was a little too aggressive in that race. Having said that, look at who he's beaten in his races. He's never really beaten anybody. He's not running huge figures. The last year's Breeders' Cup Sprint for a Breeders' Cup race was an eyesore. Jackie's Warrior, clearly it was over for him. I mean, I've always felt he was overrated. He was a good horse, but he was overrated because his competition was so insignificant throughout much of his career. He's never running fast figures, and he's going to be an enormous favorite in this race. So am I wrong? Is it like, the figures he's run in this country are just not very high?
No, but I think you could make that same argument for a lot of horses that are these heavy favorites as we go through the card. Their numbers are not so significantly above their competition that warrants that short of a price, but yet they continue to win and run numbers that are enough to get the job done. So
you mean We're Like Dancer?
I mean, like Pretty Mischievous. What huge number has she really run that's so far above her competition, yet she is currently at the top of the division?
Right. Well, she ran a 96 by her yesterday. I don't listen. I think we got the answer about the Kentucky Oaks yesterday.
It was validated.
Kentucky was a legitimately good race after yesterday's race. Those horses ran well, and I don't think that Money's Gold ran badly.
No,
I think it's
okay.
ridiculous that she was favored. She's just a sprinter, and I don't knock Todd Pletcher or the Connections for trying her in that race.
Sure.
You're the favorite in the Acorn, you run. And I think it's also good because he's sort of unequivocally answered the question. She's not winning a good race going long, and he'll cut her back to the test. So it's not like he lost anything. Otherwise, it could have run in the Jersey Girl. Well, he's got Chocolate Gelato for the race, and I think with that horse, you've sort of answered that question. So he'll probably wait for the test. But, yeah, I do think that Pretty Mischievous ran well yesterday. Wide on the outside. I mean, the pace held together fairly well. Actually, David's horse, a Colt, ran fairly well given, how the race was run. Where do you stand on Strobe? Because Strobe is probably going to be the second choice here, and Dave has him a clear-cut second choice. I'm not a fan of this horse. We'll take a look at one of his races, the Count Fleet, where he ran second. He ran okay in here. I think he's got a little phony written on him.
I would agree with that. He's one that has actually finished ahead of Elite Power in his debut, and his only poor, if you can even say that, performance was on a sloppy sealed track at Churchill Downs, where he was second as a heavy favorite. And Skelly, that's beating him in this race, is a decent horse that's put together some big performances back to back. But at the same time, in this short of a field, I think that's what makes him more of a player tactically. But I'm not a big fan on this horse. I'm not totally sold on his ability, just like you.
Do you know the significance for us at Naira of his dam flashing?
Richie rode her.
Richie's last Grade 1 winner.
Yeah.
She won
I've
the
heard
Gazelle.
many stories about flashing.
I love flashing.
It's very cool.
Despite Richie riding her, I love flashing. She won the test.
Yes.
She won the test, and she won the Gazelle. She was a really nice horse for Godolphin. Today's flavor. I've never been his biggest fan, Today's Flavor, and admittedly, I've been a little wrong about him. Now, he's been in races where he's had the run of the race, but he's also been on tracks that have been kind to his running style. But today is the day to just let him roll. And I'll tell you something. I'm not sure the best race he ran wasn't the Carter.
Yeah. Oh, his fourth place finish in that race was really a good effort considering the dynamics of that race, the added distance that he's cut back to 7 furlongs. And, he got right back to his winning ways in the affirmed success that we see here, which was over a very sloppy track. And I just feel as though he's supposed to go and be the controlling speed just like you do. And perhaps he's able to hold off a horse like Elite Power that might at the end of the day be a better horse than he is, but is going to have to come catch him.
It's interesting that the horse that ran the biggest buyer figure in this field was his last start with Synthesis, and neither of us have him in there. I'm skeptical of that fig.
Where did it come from? It's a complete anomaly to what we've seen from him so far.
I also think it might be a little high. I think it probably is 6 points lower or something, which doesn't exactly make them impossible. And here, I want to see it again to believe it. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Elite Power continues for the Mott barn that has been just so incredibly powerful and obviously has some very live horses on today's card. Race number 4, excuse me. Let's start out with the American Law Life Changer race. I'm not a big fan of American Law, who was out in the middle of the racetrack in this race, but I do like Life Changer, and I kind of agree with the morning line of 7-2 on him, that he's the one to beat. He went down to the rail, and this is a mistake. Gomez still is riding too much like an apprentice, and apprentices are told to stay at the rail to save ground. People believe in the sheets. They want to save ground, so they use apprentices because of the weight, and they go to the rail. Well, the rail was dead. And when he finally got this horse off the rail, he actually started doing a little bit of running in the race. So I do think he's dangerous in here. On the other hand, he's also piling up the seconds and thirds, isn't he?
He is, and I think you have to be a little bit concerned with how Listen to Your Heart came back and ran yesterday with taking these two horses, though I do agree that Life Changer was against the dynamics of the racetrack that day, just like you do. But with the performance that we saw from Listen to Your Heart yesterday, and the public knew as far as the wagering on him, I'm a little skeptical of horses that were facing him in his bigger performances.
Because of American Law.
Yes.
What about that race, though?
I mean, to him, coming up the rail like that and still making a little bit of a run once getting out, I have him fourth. I didn't love that race in particular because we've seen a horse like Jake Rocks who did not have the will to win, suddenly to have this big form reversal and turn things around completely. And I'm still a little of the skeptical mindset with him, although he has improved significantly.
Well, I don't like Jake Rocks particularly either, but he ran big races in there. How he ran them, I don't know, but he still ran those big races. So I guess I disagree a little bit. What do you like about Asmodeus? And I've got him fourth, so it's not like I didn't see something.
I like the cutback for him. I think he was just going a distance that he didn't really want to go last time out when he tried the very contentious Peter Pan. And I thought that he was just a little bit overmatched in that race as well. So he's getting some sort of class relief as now he is facing older horses. And I think that he has some races that have this kind of really big figure going back to his 93 Beyer. And I don't know if that's necessarily who he is, but he's able to run some decent races when he's a little bit more forwardly placed, and I think that this distance as well as a little bit of class relief will help him out.
Class relief will definitely help him, and it was a very ambitious spot last time out. You know, the Register figure comes up accurate. The problem is that Register ran one more race, and I think he got hurt. It's on the shelf since then. And listen, it makes sense that it's a big figure given that Ride Up was 10-plus lengths back. I just wonder how much sense it makes. And I'm not knocking the figure. I'm just saying it just might be a figure that he never gets back to. But I think you do have to acknowledge that, and I think you're right. He gets a lot of class relief. I didn't want to pick 12th man again. I was joking around with our friend David Aragona because he picked him. And I said, I stole your horse, Near, because he used to always love Lunissima. I said, and you stole my horse.
Traded.
And he was laughing. And the problem with 12th man, honestly, I'll have a few dollars on 12th man as insanity insurance. He gets left every time. He can't get out of the gate. It's not the rider's fault. He just can't get out of the gate. But he does have some trips. He comes out of the Rodney race. Rodney got a 101 Beyer yesterday, by the way, unchallenged with a lead. And as far as Lunissima, I really like the cutback for him. This horse has a short burst, and I thought Eric Cancel, in the race we'll look at here in the slop, gave him an absolutely perfect ride, and I think it really showed that Eric understood this is a horse you got to be careful with, because if you move too soon on him, he'll make his run, and then he just won't finish. And actually let another horse sort of circle him and make his run, and then he waited and he split horses. This was a sensational ride by Eric. And his 7 furlongs, I thought maybe he could get the right trip in here. Eric does have a good feel for this horse. And a mile and a 16th against tougher horses, just not the right spots. And I mean, there's nothing Eric could do last time running up on the pace. So I took him.
Yeah, he's one that makes a lot of sense. Eric Cancel, as you mentioned, gets along with him really well, and I do like this distance for him too. And we know with a horse like Bezos in here, there should be at least a little bit of pace for him to close into.
Bezos, he makes 2 appearances in the show in back-to-back days.
I know.
You have all about the money third. I do think it's important to note that it seems like the Jacobson horses that have been the most live have been the ones that Irad Ortiz has ridden. Is that fair?
I would agree completely.
I don't see how he wins off any of his races, but then again, I could say that about a lot of David Jacobson horses that have won races. At least to me, it's probably my handicapping more than anything else. To me, the biggest stick-out favorite. Here's a question. See, you obviously don't agree. You picked against this horse as we moved to race 5. I would rather, if somebody said you could book one horse to bet the other one, I would book Elite Power to bet Chez Pierre rather than book Chez Pierre to bet Elite Power. And I'm not, Elite Power is a very likely winner. I get that. This race last time out, I thought it was tremendous. It's not as though it came out of nowhere. He had run a huge race. He had a big layoff. He was kind of forward. He kind of needed a race at Tampa. I mean, if he runs back to this race, he will absolutely smash this field, and he's a legitimate Breeders' Cup Mile contender. I know it's early in the year. I was very impressed.
And to draw away like this against good horses like Modern Games and Up to the Mark and win by this kind of margin on the turf is something that you really do have to take seriously. And the number backs it up. I mean, he got a 106 buyer for that dominant victory. And I really guess that you do kind of just have to give him an excuse for his Tampa race where he was wide and kind of needed that start because he's really done nothing wrong otherwise. And
Done a lot right.
Yes, and I took just one small shot against him just because it doesn't really offer much to put all the favorites on top that I think are live and logical in spots like this. But I have no doubt about him being the horse to beat, and I'm not way against like this.
Before we get to your horse, let's take a look at Emmanuel. I don't like that Emmanuel didn't win this race because he got a good trip. It wasn't a particularly strong race. The whole field was strung out across the racetrack. And I'm a little concerned that he was one of these horses that came to life down in Florida. And I mean, his race in that Tampa Bay, in fact, the race we were just talking about, was absolutely sensational. And he ran reasonably well on the Canadian turf. He's just not going on with it. I mean, okay, you want to say the Maker's Mark, tough race for him. He was awful. He should have won this race.
He should have. And he was one that you kind of thought he was going places when he showed those different tactics a few starts ago in that Tampa Bay race because he was one that had been controlling really slow paces in the past. So being able to show a different dimension, you thought that maybe this was a more dynamic horse going forwards. But maybe you forgive the slow start and the depth of the field of the Maker's Mark Mile, but he really should have performed better in that dinner party. I agree with you about your assessment on Emmanuel.
So we will show Ammirati, your top pick, and have at it.
You know, he might prefer the Saratoga turf to the Belmont turf, but in his 2 starts here, he does have a second to Sifting Sands July 3rd of last year, and the multiple layoff lines aren't exactly encouraging, but this is one that he's been off since September after winning this Grade 3 Bernard Baruch handicap at Saratoga that day, and that was over City Man, who's a horse that we've seen have a very successful career so far, and there's a very specific Chad Brown stat. On turf and graded stakes at Belmont with 180-plus day layoffs, he's at 7 for 28, so he's 25% with a $2.39 ROI over the past 5 years. So these horses aren't in these kinds of spots if they aren't ready. It's going to take a really big performance to beat Chez Pierre, but I wanted to put him on top and highlight that stat.
Okay, I don't like this horse even a little bit. I have him 4th almost by default because I just didn't like others in the race. But that's an aberrant race for him. And I just have a little trouble believing that suddenly, in midway through his 7-year-old year, he turned into a different horse. Obviously, being forward seemed to help him. But I wonder if the course was getting kind of goofy. That was the last day of the meet. And I just kind of wonder if the course was taking a lot of rain and a beating, and it's just one of these weird things that he ran that race. Listen, I will not argue with him. If he runs that last race, he can win this race. But he's got a career before that of running races that have absolutely no chance whatsoever in this race. And maybe he'll do it miraculously. I think Filo di Ariana has to be discussed at some level, and you and I obviously have different opinions on him, but isn't he the controlling speed in here?
He should be, and he's been very prolific up at Woodbine. Those 2 sprint starts outside of Canada, though, they weren't that much. And for me, I just wanted to see him do at least a little bit better getting outside of Woodbine before I took him.
No, I think that's a very fair, I mean, that's the right, in my opinion, the right counter argument against him. He just has not run well outside of Woodbine. I think that's a very fair argument. The Brooklyn, the other 1.5-mile race in the dirt today, and I think people should take note that Red Run is a full to Red Route 1. We will take a look at the Isaac Murphy Marathon, named for the legendary Isaac Murphy, of course. Talk about it. I'll take a break and have some water.
You take your time. This was a race
Wake
that...
Kyle up.
Where Next was the one setting the pace, and he was coming off a layoff. You see him down towards the inside, fading a little bit, and Warrant was able to sit right off him and take over. But Red Run had been very far back early in this race and was kind of just grinding away to almost get Warrant in the very late stages of this race, and that was his first time going this distance as well. So with an improved performance in there, the 96 Buyer he got last time, and being able to run up into a pace that, for the most part, at least held together reasonably well, I was interested in taking him again over some similar type horses.
Yeah, I have a lot of trouble making a case for anybody here but Red Run, Next, Warrant, and Calibrate, and I don't think that's covering any brilliant ground. I think most people will agree with us, and we will get to the only other horse that'll take money, Bright Future, before we're done. One thing I thought that Red Run was helped by was being inside. I thought that probably helped his chances, but I have no argument with you. He improved a mile and a half. It's Mike Maker. And I also like these kind of the new guy on the scene in this race. You know, we've seen a lot of these horses, and they're okay. But Next sort of wins when he's able to control, and I wonder a little bit if Bright Future's going to, can't imagine they're not going with him. He has to be forward, going a mile and a half. As far as Calibrate, as we go down to see the Temperance Hill, 2 starts back, you can say he got a good trip. Lone Rock and Warrant were sort of engaged, but he was right off of those horses, and he improved dramatically at a mile and a half for the first time. Now, that wasn't a point when Cody Rosen was on like a massive run. I think he won like 5 straight races or something, or 4 wins in the second. His horse really running. But then he goes up to Churchill in that race we showed, and he's 3+ wide the entire way around the track, and I think he really wanted to be saving some ground. So I thought that Red Run might have had the best of it and Calibrate the worst of it, and I want to give him a shot. He's going into Jamie Ness's barn, and to just completely ignore the improvements we see, and that's going to come up in the Met Mile from Jamie Ness horses. And I know he's close with Cody Rosen, and that's, I read a little bit about that, but I'm not going to ignore it, and he's going to be the best price of all 4 of them. Maybe for good reason, but we'll see.
Well, and there's also a stat for Jamie Ness, too, with this specific distance. He's 6 for 11, so 55%, $2.95 ROI over the past 5 years at this distance.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's exactly a mile and a half. That's kind of cool.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And I don't have a knock on Warrant. He's a pretty consistent horse. He got a good trip last time, but I thought he ran well in there. I mean, I think he's pretty consistent, but I don't mind taking a shot against him. I don't like Bright Future at all. I respect the fact that Todd Pletcher has had enormous success with the horses that he has stretched out in distance, but this horse wasn't finishing in a mile last time.
No, and this is a horse that actually ran last year on Belmont Stakes Day, who was a very heavy favorite early on in the card when we were all arguing with each other about whether or not the rail was the place to be, and that
May have
bias
been early.
seemed to have disappeared later on, but I still don't have a definitive answer for those kinds of performances because we saw horses run back and run okay, run back and run poorly. I think you can make the case that early on there was an advantage to being inside, but I don't like him going this distance. And where's Fearless? Why isn't he in here? Why is he in the race earlier on?
You saying you don't like this mile and a half to 6.5 for a long move with Fearless?
It's not my favorite.
Obviously, they didn't feel like Fearless was ready to run a mile and a half off the layoff. I think that's pretty clear. The other thing about Bright Future is his 2 best races were down at Gulfstream, and I know the figure was pretty good last time, to be fair, but he also got a very fast pace that collapsed in there and a very good setup, and he got there and he just didn't finish. And that's the thing that bothered me. It was a race that was falling apart. He made his run, and then he wasn't gaining anymore, and that kind of bothered me about him. Grade 1 action is going to kick off in race number 7. Sarah and I are going to get really primed and ready to talk about those races and take a quick break to hear from our good friends whose support we appreciate at Saratoga Springwater.
For almost 150 years, the Saratoga name has been synonymous with the finest quality, sustainably sourced spring water available anywhere. Saratoga carries on the rich tradition of its forefathers by crafting each stunning blue glass bottle with the same attention to detail and care that has been its hallmark for generations. Visit SaratogaSpringwater.com today or ask for us by name at your local market or restaurant. Saratoga Springwater. Make every day exquisite.
Welcome back to Talking Horses. Sarah Bodway and Andy Serling as we get into the Grade 1 action on our card that kicks off a little bit after 3 o'clock with the Ogden Phipps when I think of the Ogden Phipps, used to be the Hempstead, I think of Personal Ensign, who was owned by Ogden Phipps. I think he owned her, not Denny Phipps, his son. I'm not 100% on that. Because there's a little, I remember her winning this race. She was one of my favorite horses. I saw almost every one of her races live.
Wow.
So let's start with Clairiere and Secret Oath. And would you disagree that Clairiere is the horse to beat in here? She is the favorite.
No, I agree with that. I think that she's trying to put those races back to back as she won this race last year, and that was really a breakout performance for her. And we saw something from her that she was finally able to defeat her rival in Malfat going back to last year. And now she has this fun rivalry with Clairiere. She was able to get the better of her last time out for her, and I think that this race has a little bit more going on beyond the two of them, but it's really cool to see these two older horses match up time and time again and be very competitive against each other. And I think that you have to at least give them both some respect, though I do like Clairiere a little bit more than Secret Oath, and I know you do as well.
Yeah, I don't particularly like Secret Oath in here. If she couldn't beat Clairiere under those circumstances in a small field with a moderate pace, I don't see how she does it in a one-turn race that figures to have at least a more honest pace that'll favor Clairiere. But I also think it's important to note that when Clairiere won this race last year, she wasn't the best horse in the race. The best horse in the race was Search Results. I mean, Search Results engaged Latruska in a torrid duel. Latruska finished beating 100 lengths in there, and excuse me, Search Results had the lead until just before the wire. And I know that Search Results, excuse me, has made a career of running really well in big races and coming up a little bit short for the most part. But I don't think she's some sort of sucker horse. I think she's just not getting it done in these situations, and a lot of it was because of Malathot. And she clearly should have won this race last year. And as we go to the race that Played Hard and Secret Oath and La Troyenne was in, Flavien Prat, and I agreed with him at the time, was convinced based on the running of the races so far that day that you needed to save ground. And he stayed in the rail and angled the two path. Look where she is compared to Played Hard and Secret Oath. I mean, they're not in the 3 and 4 path. They're out in the 6 and 7 and 8 path, basically, and she's down inside. And I think that Flavien, in trying to do the right thing, which seemed like the right thing at the time, he might have gotten a little unlucky, because if you look at the rest of that card at Churchill, you might make the case the rail was dead. And I would make the case that before it was very good. You look at the race that Money's Gold ran in that race. So I think he was reading the track, and based on what he had seen, based on the Derby City Distaff or whatever it is, but I think the track changed. That was the next day, but I think the track changed a great deal. And I don't think she was in the right part of the racetrack, as it turned out in result. Not Pratt's fault, but in result, I think she was compromised by being inside.
I think that's a fair point to make. With the Search Results, she's run such big performances, as you mentioned, without being able to hold off some of these closers coming to get her late. And you feel as though she kind of deserved to get some of those wins in the past, in this race last year, being a perfect example of that. And she's tactical too, but her Breeders' Cup Distaff was a little bit disappointing. Her return race,
it's horrendous, her Breeders' Cup Distaff.
You make a good point for why she wasn't able to hold off horses like Played Hard and Secret Oath in there. With being in that inside portion of the racetrack, but isn't she going to get some pace pressure from a horse like Played Hard once again?
Oh, she'll probably sit third, I would assume, in this race, because I think that Pass the Champagne has to go from the rail, and Played Hard will go. But it's not as though she hasn't shown the ability to rate, and rate successfully in her races. Second off last year, she ran a big race in the Ruffian, so I disagree. I think she's a major player. And it's interesting, I was looking at Marshall Graham's Twitter, and Marshall will often look at the two-day bets and imputed odds. She's the clear-cut second choice based on those. Now, the pool's not necessarily that big, and they've jumped into the replay of your selection past, what are we? Yes. That is Pass the Champagne, so why don't you talk about her? Clearly they're trying to move us along.
Yeah, they want you to hurry up. She showed some promise early on in her career, running second to Malathot in that 2021 Ashland in just her third start, and she's had some time off, some layoffs between them, but I feel as though she's been able to put a good run of races together now. And winning that Grade 2 Ruffian last time out here, she was able to be in a position from the rail where she took back, let some speed horses go ahead of her, and then was able to angle out and pull away from the field. And I wonder if that's a possible trip that she might be able to get again. I know you said that
You don't think she's a speed today? If they don't go with her today, she got no chance.
You don't think so?
I think she'll get absolutely nothing. If you, in my opinion, if you like her, and I've got her third, I'm not wildly against her. I think you want her to try to wire this field.
See, I want her to try to sit in between those closers
Good
and
luck.
the 2 horses in front of her, but
she's not going to get the separation, and it's going to be better horses that she's
it is better
dealing with. I mean,
horses.
she was
I do
beat.
agree.
I mean, listen, I know Idiomatic came back and ran 18-point by her. Okay. She also walked on the front end as a result of some buffoonish rides in her following race, and that's one of those made-up Churchill races that take horses away from the important races. But I'm not sure it's not apples and oranges a little bit. I don't know, maybe. I mean, is Gerrymander going to improve 20 points next time she runs? Do you really have confidence in her? I don't know. I think you're taking an awfully big chance of drawing the rail with a horse who theoretically is the main speed if you decide to rate her in a race like this. You want to win races like this, you got to ride them like you got the best horse.
Well, thankfully I'm not riding, so that decision's not up to me.
Yeah, listen, I will be extremely surprised if they're not aggressive with her. I'm wrong a lot, so I thought she was going to be the speed. I think, listen, I mean, this is a horse that almost won the Ashland in her third start against Malathod, who won the Kentucky Oaks in her next start, and she's been obviously beset by injuries throughout her career, but she's finally putting races together. And now she's coming off of her best buyer figure ever, and I thought maybe a tactical advantage. I think today is the day we'll find out if she's good enough to run against the big girls.
Right, and having that advantage, at least we both agree that she is going to be ahead of horses like Secret Oath and Clairiere in here, so we'll see what kind of quality she has against a field like this.
And listen, played hard. I don't want to knock her. She's run very well, and Phil Bauer has run horses in Saratoga and New York, and he's done well, and she's run well before. So maybe she's turning a corner and really turning her career around. I wouldn't be completely dismissive of her. This is an extremely competitive race.
It's a good matchup.
So race number 8, the Woody Stevens, presented by Mohegan Sun. We did lose some players here. We lost a speed horse on the rail. We lost Fort Bragg as well. I see you've moved your picks around with the scratches in this race. Let's start, though, with the Pat Day Mile, the first replay, and a lot of it was because I thought Fort Bragg ran so well in there, and I guess he had a temperature, and they're hoping to run him in the Dwyer next. He's going to be a handful in these races going forward. General Jim ran fine coming off a layoff. I mean, he had a good trip, but he ran well, and if you think the race is going to fall apart, Gilmore can win, can't he?
Oh, sure, of course. And I mean, he's a horse that has been able to run well on both dirt and turf, but he got a setup in here. There was a major pace out ahead of him. Fort Bragg was the only one to survive that those early fractions, and he was able to just get by him late. And with General Jim, even though I think he's a competitor that you have to take seriously, I don't necessarily love him going back to 7 furlongs.
Really? Oh, okay.
No.
I thought it fit him very well. He did get a good trip last time. I just, I preferred others at better prices. I'm not against him, and I think if the race really falls apart, you have to consider that Gilmore, who ran well enough in that race, Brennan coming off a big win yesterday with Pretty Mischievous. Arabian Lion, we took a look at the Sir Barton and his big 103 buyer, and you picked him. You can talk about him.
Well, with the scratches, I changed a lot of my way that I looked at this race around because I took 2 horses originally that were going to be more forwardly placed, and New York Thunder was going to be one that had to go from the rail, but now a horse like Arabian Lion is one that I have to take a little bit more seriously because he is more of that front runner and has been able to control some decent paces in the past, had this big breakout performance last time out, and you know that John Velasquez is not going to take anything away from him early if he is fast enough to be able to go on with it. So I moved him up quite a bit, and I wasn't really interested in him that much, but with 2 speed players coming out that I did like, I gave him another look, and I moved him up in my selections.
Yeah, I don't see how this horse could possibly be particularly forwarded here. There are just too many horses that are significantly faster than him. I found a stat for Bob Baffert. I don't think we showed it for what it's worth. Turning back in graded stakes from routes to sprints, his numbers are strong. And you keep in mind with Bob, you're often dealing with short-priced horses. The fact that it's a positive ROI, the 40% or 38% is not surprising with him. It's you often find him with very high percentages and low ROIs because his horses are such short prices. I get the argument that he's the horse to beat. His last race was good. He's fast. He should get a good pace to run at. Turn back works. I'm just not convinced that he's as good going shorter as he is going longer. And I think Bob's sort of trying to figure it out here.
Right, and this is a a tough spot to find out, I would say.
Yeah, it's also, for me, a tough spot to take him as the favorite. And listen, I've got him second. It's not as though I'm against him. I just wanted somebody else. And I'll tell you something. Drew's Gold and the gold, will slow his Gold Fever. I think a lot of people may make the mistake of looking and saying, well, there's nothing sexy about him. It's Jose Gomez. It's Jimmy Chapman. They're not exactly household names. They're not the guys you think of as winning grade ones. And this is a race that was won by the great Alan Jerkins with Noel Winter a number of years ago and beating Jerry Bailey and Bob Baffert. They had Flamethrower, and the Chief train put it back. That's a race that our friend Richard Migliore is particularly fond of. I'm going to tell you something. If he runs the Gold Fever, I think he wins this race. And I'm not sure he's not going to be a much better price than he should be.
Oh, I think he'll definitely be overlooked in the wagering. Does the wide outside post 13 bother you at all, or is it really not a major concern with him? Because he can get
post
himself
11
into position.
now.
Right, that's a fair point.
I think there's an advantage to the rail yesterday. Whether or not that's the case today remains to be seen. My friend Nick Tamero, thought it was stronger than I did. I mean, I like the fact that in a race with a lot of speed and he's forward, that he drew outside of some speed so he could get in a stalking spot. So, no, I'm not concerned at all. And I think he's going to get ignored quite a bit considering how good he is. I think he's going to be 5 or 6 to 1. And maybe he's supposed to be vying for favoritism here. And if he had more sexy, connections to take that kind of attention, I think you would see a shorter price on him. Federal Judge really benefits from the scratches because it did take a little of the speed out of the race. I have him third. You have him nowhere. I thought this race that we'll look at here at Churchill was sensational by him. He ran fast first time out, and then he got extra. Anejo was coming off a 93 buyer in his first start. I think that was Brad Cox. Deer District ran an 84 buyer and improved to 97 for Dale Romans in his next start. I know he's lightly raced, but this guy's pretty good.
He is, and this was a big performance that we saw from him. And Extra Neho, of course, returning off that layoff, but was extremely highly touted for the Asmussen barn. He was able to get away from him. I think that he's a major contender. I didn't have him involved in my top 4 because trainer Rudolph Brissett is only 2 for 25 over the past 5 years here at Belmont Park, so he doesn't have a ton of success when he brings his horses to run here. That stat wavered me a little bit from Federal Judge.
No, I mean, that's one of the reasons I don't have him higher, to be honest. That concerned me a little bit. He's got to bring his game here. I'm not sure he's brought too many horses as good as this one here. You have to also love that it's a Congaree dam. You just never see Congaree around here. And Congaree is one of the faster horses. You know, the Congaree, I think he won the Cigar twice, but I believe he failed twice in the Met Mile. It's once at like 2 to 5. I think he was 2 to 5 in the race that I want to say Aldebaran beat Sarland. I think he was in there in the slop and was 2 to 5. And Army Mule, I mean, he is having significant success early in his career as a stallion and seems to be passing along as good talent. I think this horse is going to run well in here. Let's move on to Harrodsburg, who you could have scratched into on top and didn't. I think you have to move him down. We'll look at the last race of him after the performance of Listen to Your Heart yesterday.
That's why I couldn't put him on top, to put it very simply. I would have logically scratched into him being my top pick, and I just couldn't do it with the horse that we saw yesterday coming back and really not firing. But he is a 3-year-old that has faced older already in his 2 starts, and he showed good progression from his good start to his second-placed effort. But you have to be a little bit suspect of that with the horse that was able to beat him just not coming back and running well. And it was only a 4-horse field last time. He's also going to have to figure out if he can rate, and I don't know if that's going to work in his favor as much as being able to control early on.
I think he's going to have to go in here, and May's going to go with him, and he may have to deal with Federal Judge, if not others. Talk about Fort Warren.
This is one that will really benefit from things getting hot early, as he has shown the ability to rate, whereas others have not done so successfully. He can also handle the 7 furlong distance, and being able to get the distance, come from behind horses and pass them. And this is another former Baffert trainee that stays with Brittany Russell. I don't feel as though he's totally out of the question. He's going to be a very big prize.
Yeah, I was talking about this horse with our friend David Aragona the other night because I saw that he picked him, and I obviously have a world of respect for his opinion. I didn't like this horse. He liked the field he ran with more than I did last time out. But listen, I mean, I think people will look and see it was Bob Baffert. Now it's with Brittany Russell. Well, Doppelganger did okay for Brittany as well, so I don't want to knock that. And listen, he's a lightly raced horse in a field of lightly raced horses, and he's going to be a price. This is an absolutely sensational race. Listen, I don't think Victory Formation turning back is impossible in this race. How about Gun Pilot turning back? I wish I thought he was a little bit better, but it's not like he's a total bum. There are a lot of horses in here that have real chances. This is a terrific running of the race.
It is, and I know we saw kind of that superstar last year with Jack Christopher, but this race is extremely competitive and much better from a wagering standpoint.
As good as Jack Christopher was, for me, the best performance I saw in this race, and really, I'm not sure it wasn't the best performance of that entire year, was when Bayern won this race. In fact, our friend Gary Stevens rode him that day. I mean, he dueled with Pure Sensation. And people forgot that Pure Sensation was a good dirt horse before he went to the turf. And I think Pure Sensation was right there until the 8th pole. And he was a brilliantly fast horse. And Bayern, what did he win by, like 5 or 6 lengths? He just crushed that field. That was a great running of the Woody Stevens, of course, named for the legendary Woody Stevens, who, I mean, a lot of people would say that his winning 5 Belmonts in a row was his greatest accomplishment. I'm not sure that getting $35 on Danzig in his first start wasn't his actual greatest accomplishment. I didn't know Woody, but I have a sneaky suspicion he knew how to cash a bet with the best of them. Maybe the coolest story running on today's card is our friend Lee Einsiedler's horse, Casa Creed, who's looking to win his 3rd Jaipur in a row. And the legendary Ryan Martin Naira and I were looking up horses that had won grade 1s 3 or more years in a row, and I came up with Forgo as the last one to do it, and we can look at Casa Creed winning last year's Jaipur over Resmi Red. I think Forgo, when he won 4 straight Woodwards from 74 to 77, is the last horse to do it. Harmony Lodge and the MIG spoiled Shine Again's attempt to do it in the Ballerina, and I think Sister Charlie fell short in a race or 2 as well.
And you have to take him super seriously. He was able to get a really good trip in this race last year, saving ground and angling out in the stretch. But you can tell that this Belmont turf course and this 6 furlong distance really agrees with him. He's done very well over it in the past. And he's a horse that I feel as though they had a little trouble finding what was that preferred distance for him. What did he really want to do? He wants to go 6 furlongs in the Jaipur. This is his race to lose, I feel.
You have him 4th. I have him 3rd. Why do you not have him higher?
The outside draw, the fact that he doesn't have any early speed, and the fact that I like a horse with a little bit more of an inside post who's going to be a better price.
Yeah, my concern is related to that, but more specific. Luis Saez gave him about as good a ride as you can give a horse last year, and he got him to the good rail, and he rode the rail till he angled out late. And the problem is that he had post 4 that day. Today, even with the scratch, he still has post 10. And he's got a similar type runner with a little more speed, big invasion inside of him. So getting him the rail and working out the same kind of trip feels a little tough. Having said that, he is the best horse in this race. I mean, I thought he ran extraordinarily well in the race in Saudi where there was no pace and he made a long extended outside run to get there. So I don't want to take him lightly. And listen, I always root to see Lee's horses do well, but I think it's going to be tougher. I also think this is a tougher field than last year's race. Let's talk about Caravel, who is the morning line favorite. You have her 2nd. I would like to book her win, place, show, supers, pick 5s, pick 4s, pick 3s, pick 2s. We'll look at a Breeders' Cup Sprint. Listen, she's obviously run well, and Brad's done a good job with her, but in my opinion, she's about as lucky and dressed up a horse ever. When multiple speeds are rating in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, there's a problem in this game. And she has had incredibly soft trips. And after the performance of Baystorm and Sarah Harper yesterday, when she had the run of that race, you really think in a race where she's got to deal with nothing better, she's going to get another cozy trip and beat this field? I think she's ridiculously bad bet in this race.
She is. And she's been a bad bet in several of her last races. And
well, last race she couldn't lose.
Just the kind of trips that she ends up getting over and over again in these types of races.
Right, because you knew she'd get it last time. She was the only speed in the race.
Sure, but if you go back to that Breeders' Cup race, that shouldn't have happened. I know Golden Pal didn't get out of the gate, but there should have been some other speed going on in there, and she just keeps getting these perfect kind of setups over and over again, and I keep trying to beat her, and honestly, I keep getting frustrated with it, and I'm not betting her to win, of course, in here, and you wouldn't at 3-1 anyway. But
I wouldn't bet her at 30-1.
But with her,
I'm serious.
I believe you. And she just keeps finding a way to get into a really cozy position early on. And you know that they're going to try to go, and you know when one guy goes, someone else doesn't go.
Hang on a second. First of all, yeah, I get it. But that is a disgrace what happened in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. I mean, seriously, that was the most ridiculous series of rides I've ever seen. And listen, I'll give credit to Tyler, at least he went. But look at Nothing Better, who we'll take a look at him last time. Manny Franco's not rating Nothing Better.
He can't. He has to go, and he's
he is
faster.
going. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm not sure he's not every bit as talented as she is going there. And he is a fast horse that doesn't stop. And she's going to have her hands full with him early, and then she's going to have her hands full with a lot of good horses late. Listen, I'm wrong a lot, but I don't get Caravel at all. I'd rather bet Nothing Better if I bet a speed here.
And you have to respect his consistency, too. I mean, hitting the exact in his last 7 starts, I think that he is going to be right up there, and I do think he is faster than her early. And at least Manny is that aggressive kind of rider that will send instead of someone else who might try to take back with this horse. This is a much tougher group than he's been facing lately, but you certainly have to give him some respect based on where he's going to be early on and with what we've seen from how the turf courses have played so far.
Yeah, he's good. Manny's going to go with him, and good luck to Caravel. Maybe, who knows, maybe that horse, 3th speed, potential speeds will fall down at the start. So talk about Go Bears Go.
I don't really have an excuse for his non-effort in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, but I feel as though he did redeem himself enough off the layoff last time out in the Turf Sprint Stakes at Churchill Downs, where he was 3rd behind a long shot winner that day. And this is one of those rare Wesley Worth turf horses that ends up being a fair price for the most part. He's won at the 6 furlong distance before over in Europe, where he's done the majority of his running. Perhaps he can take another step forward. He is going to get an inside trip saving ground, come from a little bit off the pace in a race that does project to feature some of it. And I think that he's at least one that he had a little bit of promise and steam to him early when he was coming over for that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. I know a lot of people liked him that day. I know he hasn't really gone on to the same extent in the U.S. at least, but I like that he's staying here and really just the price and the trip that I project he's going to get.
Okay. I thought he got a tremendous trip last time out, staying on a very good rail, but he's going to be a big price. I'm not going to knock him. Let's talk about Big Invasion, who I considered putting him on top in here. He and Dr. Zemp are the 2 horses that I like in here. He obviously got a nightmare of a trip last time. It was one of the second in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. We're going to look at Big Invasion winning the quick call last year. Second to the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, this was the worst. Actually, it's possible his last race was the worst ridden race of all time. No Balls isn't even a speed. He was allowed to walk around the track at a slow pace, and Big Invasion had no chance. He got in trouble. He got steadied badly at the 3/8 ball. It's hard to watch the race because I don't know what there's in the infield at Churchill, but nothing that allows you to see the races. He is capable of being good enough to win here, and Joel has got a secure inside position with him in here, and I think he's been very unlucky last time out, and I'm not sure he doesn't have it in him to just be maybe the best turf sprinter in the country, but he's got to show up today with a good effort.
He does, and to me, I just felt as though this was an extremely tough field to be finding out about him. I agree that he had some trouble last time, but with a similar running style to a horse like Casa Creed, I just wasn't that interested.
He's faster than Casa Creed early, though. He doesn't need to be that far back, and I think they need to try to get him into the race. It's not going to be near the pace, but a little bit closer. See, I think that potentially they're supposed to look at Casa Creed, and they're supposed to say, we're going to be in front of him. Can make sure, because I don't think he wants to get into a situation where he's trying to outclose Casa Creed. No. I think he wants Casa Creed to have to come get him. And that's, I think tactically, the most important thing Joel can do is obviously try to get inside position, which he's so good at, but more importantly, get in front of Casa Creed. I think everybody wants to in that situation. Now, I want to talk about Dr. Zemp, who I picked on top, and there's still more to talk about, and we still have a little bit of time. Now, it's dwindling. I think this is a great turn back for Dr. Zemp. And I always think about, I know it was down the hill, but Bobby's Kitten for Chad Brown. We're taking a look at Dr. Zemp's win at Gulfstream, 2 back. And that was a route race, 7.5 around 2 turns is more like a mile race than a sprint race. But he's got some respectable sprints. He ran off last time in the Maker's Mark in the middle of that race. And this is something that I think is a very good move, is to cut back horses that get a little bit rank, these kind of horses. And he'll get a chance to settle in here. And I'm a big Flavien Prat fan. If he can get the right trip, I love this turn back. You are obviously not as big a fan as I am.
No, I'm not a big fan of horses that run off like he did last time, but I do agree that a horse like this, if he's able to settle down, he could end up being a horse that sits closer to the pace than some of these other ones that are going to be closing late, and maybe he just finds himself being more comfortable in a race like this where he can run a little bit more early.
I think that the two Dave Donk horses actually are live in here. I think the Florent's going to give a better ride and get some position with Yes and Yes, and I always feel like Thin White Duke can put in a run, and I have to suck up a little to my good friend Steve Christ and hope that this horse gets a piece in here. The Hillendale Met Mile, one of my favorite races every year, and I wanted to show the Breeders' Cup races, so I went back to Cody's Wishes Breeders' Cup win, where I felt Slowed Out Andy actually ran very well in this race. It's a tough spot off the layoff, but what can you say about Cody's Wish? He just delivers, and a one-turn mile is so much better for him than these two-turn races where he has to make earlier, wider moves. He can just run in the flow of it, and the rail doesn't worry me. He's a closer. It shouldn't make any difference at all.
I know there's been some concern voiced about him getting, stuck on the rail, but he's just going to drop back anyway. It really doesn't bother me either, and he's one that I feel as though a lot of people are going to consider kind of a universal single today, and this is a really deep race when you get outside of him, but he is so talented, and of course you have to root for him with the story of Cody Dorman as well. He's really done nothing wrong in these kinds of races, and he's extremely talented. He makes those big wide moves closing into races where nobody else is necessarily making up the kind of ground that he is. So
there's nothing not to like about him. He's good. He shows up,
good.
and he's good. He's incredibly consistent. He's good. Let's take a look at Repo Rocks and Zandon from the Westchester. I think that Zandon is going to run better today. He'll get more pace to run out. He's run his best races, second off a layoff. I don't trust Repo Rocks at all because while he ran, he's run the two figures, maybe the best figures anybody in this race has really run, except he has no level of consistency whatsoever. And last time he ran a big number, he ran two numbers that would get him 0 in this race, and I'm going to be shocked if he classes up to this field.
This is going to be a huge class test for him, and you have to certainly take a look at the kind of performances that he's been able to deliver, but it is that worry about him being able to do so back-to-back. We haven't seen it yet, and he's not going to take my money until we do.
Next, we'll talk about Charge It, and we'll roll into that Dwyer video as soon as the guys can get it going. And if he runs the Dwyer, and that's about as big an if as you can possibly find, he's going to be very tough to beat in here. But I think he's going to be very forward today. And while Dr. Schivel we'll talk about has speed as well, I'd love to see Johnny just let it roll with this horse and clearly Charge It. And you could easily have more your opinion or even worse opinion of him because he's been such a disappointment. But I imagine looking back on it, they probably wish they ran him in the Carter as his second start this year instead of coming back just a month after his debut at Gulfstream. And his Dwyer, which we'll look at, was just a sensational performance. And before people say, well, he won by 23 lengths, but he beat a bunch of tomato cans, I don't agree with that. And give people a chance to catch their breath, and we can catch up and get that Dwyer video. The second place finish there, Running Son of a Gun, I mean, all he ever did was run really well in grade 2s and grade 3s after that. So why are we supposed to? I think he even ran third in the Jerkins.
He did.
He didn't beat up on a bunch of bums. He beat by a very good horse by 23 lengths.
And if this Charge It shows up today, I'll be thrilled. I'm a big Charge It fan, but where is this performance? Because we just have not seen that kind of situation from him lately. And really, last time, the Oaklawn handicap was just bad. He probably should have beaten Doris in that Gulfstream Park Mile if he was the horse that he looked like he was going to be. But if he is that Dwyer horse today, he's going to give Cody's Wish a run for his money.
Yeah, I'm gonna hope that today is the day that he shows up with that big effort. I've never been as big a fan of him as you, but I do sense his talent, and it feels like the one turn at Belmont. This is the day. It's like put up or shut up for him. White Abario on the far outside. Rick Dutro's just gotten back his license back, and I can't speak for you, but I wish him all the success. He got a severe punishment, and he served his time, and he's back. He's a very, very good trainer. And listen, this horse on his day can run some good races, but he's going to have to step forward to win this race because he doesn't have one race, even the one we tried to show there, isn't fast enough to win this race.
No, and he's another one that just kind of like Filo Di Ariane earlier, he can win one outside of Gulfstream without me, even though he has run good races outside.
Cigar Mile was good.
It was, but he hasn't won outside of Gulfstream Park yet, and this is just a horse that, while I respect his talent and ability, this is a very deep field to be contesting.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way as they'll get ready to show the video for Dr. Schivel. You're going to tell us what you were doing when you picked Hoist the Gold in here.
I always pick Hoist the Gold. And you can call me crazy just like David did, who made his morning line 30-1. But just imagine for a moment if he was winning all of these races that he's hit the board in at giant prices. If we were talking about a horse that had put together the Perryville, the Malibu, the Commonwealth, and then the Churchill Downs last time, where he has hit the board in all of those starts, what kind of price would he be? He wouldn't be anywhere near 30-1.
But he wasn't winning them. He wasn't running figures that are competitive. He lost to Hear My Song 2 races back. He was second by default last time out. He's a nice horse. I don't want to knock him. He's going to be 100-1 if you like him. This is Dr. I don't know what we're looking at here. What are we looking at here?
We're looking at
Oh,
Dr.
this is the
Schivel.
Breeders' Cup Sprint for Dr. Schivel. Sorry. We'll get to him. Watch Dr. Schivel take a brutal beat in the Breeders' Cup. I just don't know what Hoist the Gold. I mean, listen. If you want to get him second or third somewhere, I still don't see it happening. This is a pretty tough race, and he's never run a triple-digit buyer, and it's going to take a big figure to win this race.
I don't disagree with you. I like him a little bit at 7 furlongs, more so than the further distances as well. But he's one that has just shown up consistently against pretty good horses. Gun Knight's a pretty good horse that he was able to finish second to. He's always a big price. He always seems to run his race. Is his race good enough here? Maybe it's not. Maybe that's why he's $1,000,000 to 1. But I have to continue to use a horse that's been very good to me in the past that always seems to have that consistency on big days where he does look on paper like he is overmatched.
Okay, he's a huge price. Dr. Schivel, my friend Frank Miramati, is convinced he's going to win today. Now, that's good and bad, depending on how you look at it, but he did run well in that 3-horse field, and he's got some ability. And listen, they're shipping this horse all the way across the country to run a big race, and maybe they're feeling part of it is he's good now. This is the day to take a shot with him because he's obviously a horse that has a lot of issues.
And the stretch out is a big question for him. He is going this far for the first time, but he's going to be the speed. And we'll see if he's good enough to do so as we're a helicopter.
I feel like it's Goodfellas when the helicopter is following Ray Liotta.
Yeah.
You know, like somewhere out there's a copter making it so we can't hear it all. We'll see what happens with him as we move it along with the copter. Somewhere out there, it is a copter, right?
It's right over there. You see it? Right in the infield?
Oh, Saul Kuhlman's
It's waiting
here.
for you.
His copter just landed. Race number 11, the Resorts World Manhattan. I don't have a knock on Up to the Mark, who you've picked on top and I picked second. I think it's a tougher field today, but he just crushed these horses. This is a really good horse.
It is, and we saw this kind of type of margin with a horse like Che Pierre, who we talked about earlier. When you have a horse that is able to circle a field and draw off significantly on the grass, that says a lot about them, more so than it does when you have a dirt horse beating other horses by these kind of significant margins. There's no disgrace when he finished third to horses like Modern Games and Che Pierre in that Maker's Mark mile. And since switching over to the turf, he's just been a totally different kind of animal. He's had progressive stretch outs in distance as well, so I'm not super concerned about the 1.25 miles, and I think he has enough tactical ability to get himself into some type of position, as he's going to have to get himself over to save at least a little bit of ground.
I do worry that his second dam is Capote Bell, the brilliant sprinter, and to get the extra furlong, but I can't knock him. He's really good. But I do want to show some of the Man of War. And Warren Point, who should never have been 3-5 last time out, but the reality was I was against him last time, and yeah, I was right because he didn't win, but I wasn't that right because he ran a big race. First of all, he got left, but I don't really care that much about him getting left a little bit. The problem wasn't getting left. The problem was that he ran off on Frankie Dettori. And the kind of move that he made on the backstretch, and we're going to pick it up with a half mile to go, you can't win races with these kind of moves. And I understand that he's running against better horses than Red Knight with the presence of Up to the Mark. But, I mean, he makes a move from near last to right up the lead. We actually picked it up a little late in here because he was back in last and made this huge run up to get right there. And so he understandably tired as the race was completely falling apart at the end. And today is the day for Warren Point. I like him better than Ottoman Fleet, who will show his race as soon as we can after this race. And he had a perfect trip. But I think Warren Point, cleaner trip today. He's the one who can upset the favorite.
He certainly had some significant trouble last time, but to me, and this is something you mentioned, this is just a much tougher field that he's going to be facing today.
Well, other than Up to the Mark, who's tougher?
Well, Ottoman Fleet's beat him before.
What?
Ottoman Fleet has beat him before.
Okay. I don't like Ottoman Fleet, but go ahead.
He has to get out of the gate, and that's a concern for all of these European horses as we now take a look at Ottoman Fleet, who was able to get the win in the Fort Marcy, but that wasn't exactly the strongest race either. I think that you have to give both of them some significant respect with all these Charlie Appleby's horses. I understand you wanting the bigger price of the two who had a race over here and wasn't able to get out of the gate, made that big move like you mentioned, and then had every excuse to flatten out late. I just didn't really see it with him. I think that Ottoman Fleet's a little bit better quality, but I get what you're saying about Warren Point.
Okay, I mean, you're right. Ottoman Fleet did beat him a couple lengths in that race. I felt like Warren Point was a little more interesting, would be a better price than him. And I thought that Ottoman Fleet was really dressed up by the good trip last time. I really can't take anybody else in here, especially without our friend Tribuven coming in to try to wire the field. Well, strong quality can try to wire the field. Let's see if he can get 1.25 miles, or even Ocean Atlantique with Luis Saez. He should just send him. We'll see what happens in the Manhattan. The Belmont Stakes, presented by Naira Bets. The big one is coming up here. And let's start with Forte, who will vie for favoritism with Tapit Trice. I think with the name recognition, he'll be favored. Where are you on Forte?
Forte, with all the circumstances coming into this race, scratching out of the Derby, the layoff that he now has to contend with, and perhaps pointing to a race later on this summer rather than this spot, and now switching over to run in the Belmont Stakes. I think that he is the best 3-year-old male in the division that we've seen so far, but there's a lot of circumstances coming into here that aren't exactly favorable for him that he'll have to overcome. I get why David had to make him the favorite. I have to take him seriously from what we've seen from him so far, but I couldn't take him on top.
Yeah, I'm way against him in here. I don't dislike him like I dislike Caravel, because he is an unknown quantity, and you have to respect Todd Pletcher in this race. But I didn't like his Florida Derby. I thought Mage ran the better race than he did. Listen, I get the frustration from the connections. You see Mage winning the Derby, and you couldn't run. You felt he could have run. It's awful. But I also remember Todd Pletcher saying after the Derby thing, something to the effect of, we'd love to get him in the Preakness, but if not, we'll wait for Saratoga. So I have trouble getting 1.5 miles with a violence in this field. And I know he didn't miss really any training, maybe a day, but he still hasn't run in 10 weeks, and that concerns me a little bit. I have great respect for Todd and the record he has in the Belmont. I think you want to play against him in here. We'll get to Tapit Trice, who will vie for favoritism. I did put National Treasure's video second. He is the Preakness winner. I don't like National Treasure at all, and you don't have him in your top 4 either.
No, I don't really think that he is the necessarily going to get 1.5 miles either, and he's going to have to deal with a horse like Tapit Shoes from the inside, who should just go and send. And I think that if you took Tapit Shoes out of this race, you would have to at least consider National Treasure a little bit more as that pace player to try to do what he did in the Preakness. And I remember I was talking with someone yesterday who felt as though his Preakness fractions were legitimate, but I remember after the race they weren't. And Randy Moss said it was like claiming time.
Look at the fractions that the Baffert horse in the Woody Stevens set, Arabian Lion. They were considerably faster.
Right. So
he was crawling.
Exactly.
And with Tapit Shoes, it's not happening.
Right, and that would be the circumstance that would lead him to victory, and I don't see it happening, so that's why I'm not really a fan of his.
I don't like him anyway, but I agree with that, all of that. Tapit Trice. Let's talk about him, the horse that you have 4th and I have 2nd. The whole world loves this horse, though apparently the whole world likes our horse, Hit Show, as well. This is his bluegrass. I have no argument with him off of this race. I don't like any of his other races that much, to be honest. He's had some pretty good trips. My worry with him is he's going to be a short price. He had everything his own way in the Kentucky Derby, and he stunk. He was back there with Mage and Angel of Empire, and they showed up, and he didn't run at all. On the other hand, Todd Pletcher's horses, they show up in the Belmont Stakes.
And I think if you like him today, you're just calling that Derby a toss-out. That's not really necessarily how I handicap. I know that's not really what you do either, of just being like, well, let's just discard that race completely for him. If you do so, I get it.
You better get 10 to 1 when you discard races for no reason.
I get the Tapit. I get the Todd Pletcher. I get thinking that you can take away the Derby from him and he's run okay races. They're not okay enough for me to take him as the second choice or vying for favoritism.
I agree. I do have him 2nd, but I have my reservations. But it's really more out of respect for Todd and how well his horses, they just seem to show up in this race. Angel of Empire and Hit Show will show the Kentucky Derby, and then as quickly as we can, we'll show Hit Show's Wood Memorial. Angel of Empire always shows up. He got the pace to run at. I thought he more was picking up pieces at the end, but at least he shows up with his races. Why do you like Hit Show?
Hit Show is a horse that I felt was always a little bit overhyped in the first couple of races that we saw from him up until his Wood Memorial. But in this Kentucky Derby, he had the rail. That's never the place you want to be in the Derby, even though it isn't as much of a detriment as it had been in past years. But he was close up the whole time to a pace that fell apart completely, except for Two Fills, who was able to salvage second. And he was able to still run a much better than it looks fifth. He was involved with that kind of early pace and had every excuse to back out of there, still stayed on for a decent amount of that race. And I think that now getting away from the rail, getting into a race that's not going to feature a pace where he's going to have to be that close up early on to fractions like that, I think that this is going to be a better spot for him. And I also think that going back to his Wood Memorial, too, having to break from post 13 to the far outside and get into a decent position stalking, he also got sandwiched in the stretch in there between Lord Miles and Dreamlike as well. So for him to show that kind of tenacity when he finished second ultimately, I just felt as though we saw a lot more in his losses than we ever did in his wins. And I think that that tells you a lot more about his ability than we ever saw from his starts early on, where he was facing lesser quality competition and getting things more his own way.
Yeah, and we'll try to roll that Wood Memorial if we can. Yeah, I mean, obviously, and anybody watched the video I did for this race knows that I completely agree with all of those sentiments. I think he's a horse that comes into this race off of two better efforts than it may appear. One of them was last time, where he was about 2 lengths off of Two Fills at most. He made that run, and you couldn't finish. And Two Fills, who's running where any horse that ran the best race in the Kentucky Derby should run their next start, the Ohio Derby. Why would you run him in a Triple Crown race? I thought he ran very well in there, and I want speeds. And he's the horse who was close to the pace that finished the best that's coming back in this race. And then the Wood Memorial, I think because of the post he got and the fact that he basically needed to finish second to get the points, they needed to be aggressive with him. So they rode against what may have been sort of their better nature of how he should be ridden in there. And I agree. I think Hit Show is a major player in here. I'm not against Angel of Empire. Archangelo, who you have third, and I have fifth and could have put second or third, and I wouldn't feel badly. I thought this horse ran extremely well in the Peter Pan. And I mean, who's to say that he's not on the cusp of turning it around and turning into one of the best 3-year-olds in the country? And his pedigree says he's supposed to handle this distance with no problem.
There's plenty of dam side pedigree that you just mentioned to suggest it. He's related to Rags to Riches, Jazzle, and that Peter Pan was a very game performance for him, too. Him and Bishop's Bay drew far, far clear of the rest of the contenders in this field. That was a breakout buyer for him of a 97 as he got a little bit more ground to work with. And Jenna Antonucci seeks to become the first female trainer to win the Belmont. I think that he's a player you have to at least consider. It's what's going to be a fair price.
Let's roll the video for Red Route 1 in the Bathhouse Row when he beat Tappet Shoes, who will probably act more of a rabbit than anything else. What do you think of Red Route 1? The fact that he was close to the pace in the Preakness, he ran a respectable race, and looking at the pedigree of that horse in the Brooklyn makes you want to think that maybe this horse could improve at 1.5 miles.
It's more that closers don't generally do well in races like this, getting more distance, but you think that perhaps this is a pedigree that does support the fact that he will enjoy getting a little bit more and get to come from further out of things and being in that uncomfortable position he ended up being in the Preakness. He's one that always at least comes with a run for the most part, and I have a lot of respect for his ability. I just don't know if this is the right spot for him.
I don't disagree. But Joel has a knack in this race of getting the right kind of trip. The Belmont Stakes presented by Naira Bets, the 13th. Let's skip the second video, though I do think that Schmilkus is a little interesting, and look at Spirit of St. Louis last time, finishing second to Olympic Dreams, who was a huge price, and he does have a pedigree that suggests he should love the grass. He's a full to bar gold who was better on the dirt. They purchased this horse for $280,000. Peter Brandt dispersed some of his runners, and Connections bought this horse. I just feel like he's going to be overbet with the Chad Brown factor, the fast dirt races, getting to a surface he's bred for. And I feel like our top choice, Let's Go Big Blue, has already run turf races that are better. He gets a rider switch to Jose Lescano. He's Lasix for the first time. And I just prefer a horse that's already done it on the turf that's going to be a better price.
I do too. We saw this race very similarly, as you'll see. He won on debut at Saratoga. He followed it up with a good third in the Now. And as he comes back in here, in that Central Park that was won by Batflip, he was very wide that day on the first turn, wide on the second turn, had nothing to offer. He's got a lot of changes going for him now coming back.
We got to go.
We've said it all.
Head over to Naira Bets. We'll roll through these extremely quickly. Naira Bets, no better time than the present to sign up. Get that free $25 bet along with the sign-up bonus. There are $31,000 worth of hidden splits on today's card. Go over to Naira Bets to get the details on those. There it is. Belmont Stakes Day, lots of hit and splits, NairaBets.com, and you want to opt in for those. And you also want to opt in for the $10 money back on the Belmont. You bet a horse $10 to win. You run second or third, you get your money back. We also have the Showdown, the free online contest, Naira.com/showdown. And last but not least, we're on all day, 11 to 3 on FS1. We'll continue in FS1 till 7:30. Then we'll go to FS2, and of course, Big Fox from 3 to 7:30. And we're really excited. I mean, Fox has been a great, great partner for us for years, but we're extremely excited that for the first time ever, they are covering the Belmont Stakes. Sarah, thank you. Terrific job. As always, the man, the voice of the New York Racing Association, John Imbrial. He's up next with a reprise of Scratched and Changes. We're just getting revved up. Enjoy the Belmont Stakes.
For almost 150 years, the Saratoga name has been synonymous with the finest quality, sustainably sourced spring water available anywhere. Saratoga carries on the rich tradition of its forefathers by crafting each stunning blue glass bottle with the same attention to detail and care that has been its hallmark for generations. Visit SaratogaSpringwater.com today or ask for us by name at your local market or restaurant. Saratoga Spring Water. Make every day exquisite.
Hello, racing fans, and once again, welcome to beautiful Belmont Park on Belmont Stakes Day 2023. Ideal conditions here in Elmont, New York. Mostly sunny skies, the temperature in the mid to upper 70s. The main track is fast, the turf courses are firm, and there are no portable rails in use on either the Widener or the inner turf. And right now, we'll take a look at the changes for today's 13 race card. And we have no changes to report. In the first, in race number 2, scratch the 3, Sikkim. Scratch number 3, Sikkim, out of the second. 9 stakes races today. The first is the Grade 2 True North. It's race 3 on the card, and there are no changes. We have additional pick